questions?
So first, thank you so much. I think you did a very good job being objective and trying to go through the nuances of the issue. My main question revolves around, so in the beginning, what was the initial reason for seizing this Catholic journal? Because it seems like this paper has been going around for some time. Did it just come to the notice of the federal government that, oh, this has been there, and they not realize beforehand? And that gets to the Catholic Church argument that the federal government is not in this issue, it's a state issue. What is the constitutional reason behind that? Is this a federal government issue? Is this a state issue? And how is that handled? Because I'm trying to figure out, was this the result of, overzealous federal government bureaucrats? Or was this, they made a mistake and after that the government had to double down on it if they didn't want to look, bad for making a mistake? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Probably the best academic answer is a bit of everything.
Yeah.
And as far as the use of the word Allah is concerned, this is nothing new. In 1980s, actually, there was a much more stricter ban on the Al-Kitab. But there was a negotiation between the Catholic, not just the Catholic Church, the Christian representatives with the government of that time under Dr. Mahathir. And there was an agreement, therefore you have all these restrictions and these qualifiers. And of course, that time, it was always related to whether the use of this kind of literature or Christian literature in Malay is distributed to Malay-Muslim communities where there may be some form of proselytization that is going on. So that is always underneath this discussion about proselytization or using the word in order to deceive. In fact, even today, and I know someone actually put a link on Professor Brown's Facebook and to ask him to read a particular document by one of the English professors in our local universities. And he basically spends a lot of time saying that the Christians have a very devious agenda to use this word in order to deceive. I mean, to put it bluntly, that's basically what he's trying to say. And then he also tries to trace it back to how the missionaries were doing it in the past, and whether this is all about the gospel, gold and glory, this is the kind of things that he's trying to argue for. And he published that, I think, after the controversy was made public, right, throughout that time. So you always had this kind of thinking, not just in the government, but also in some parts of the academia. And these are professors in the university, or even some intellectuals. And some of them may have also sincere theological or philosophical reasons why they feel that, for example, the Malay language is already Islamized and the word Allah can only mean a strict monotheism in the mind of the Muslims. So there's a bit more complication in that kind of argument. So at all these different layers, you have different forces at work. But as far as the ban is concerned, one could argue there was a back and forth of the Home Ministry. Because at first they banned, then they said no, it's okay, then they went back. And this is around the time of a lot of political, I wouldn't say uncertainty, but political dynamics that was going on after Dr. Mahathir stepped down. There was Abdullah Badawi, who was promoting Islam Hat Hari. Najib Razak talked about One Malaysia. So these things were going on politically, and there were also political forces at work within the Barisan Nasional. So if you want to take a political science angle to this, you could take it there. But I also don't want to downplay the real social cultural dynamics as well. When I interviewed Abim's, one of the NGO's president, in fact, he gave me this gift for this book. He said, Sivin, theologically, this is not an issue. I said, oh, then why are we having this discussion? I said, but Sivin, but most of our people, when they read the word Allah, they wouldn't associate it with Christians. And of course, he, as someone who is familiar with Sabah and Sarawak, knows that there are others who use it. But he said, but the majority of the population is West Malaysia, if they're educated in the religious schools, would have no conception of a Christian using the word Allah. So now you have East Malaysians coming to West Malaysia to work. They almost look alike. They look alike Normani. They probably look like any Malay Muslim, and suddenly you hear this person maybe praying to Allah, and then found out, oh, he's a Christian. So these are things that are interesting that's going on socio-culturally as well. Yeah. I'll go for maybe a lady first, and then two. Okay.
Sorry, quick question. Thank you. Really good presentation. So I wanted to know which court system did it go through. Was it? I'm assuming it wasn't the religious courts, and why?
Civil courts.
So civil courts. So would there have been a difference if? I mean, it seems if they were playing it as a theological issue, and you could have argued that it should have been other courts.
But in Malaysia, this was probably the only place that the Catholic Church could have gone to, because the Sharia courts would not deal with this kind of issues. It's still very much family matters, inheritance, and others. That's where the Sharia mainly functions in the context of Malaysia. Correct me if I'm wrong. So this, and of course, the Catholic Church wanted in Malaysia, all these issues would be dealt with in a civil court. So this, and they were also arguing on issues of procedural matters as well. So there were some technical aspects of this which I did not go into, but there were also parts of that. It was about the power of the Home Minister. Did he have the power to do what he did? Was one of the core issues as well. I'll take one question here. Is that okay?
Just a comment, first of all, I note, I think from your slide that the Bible was translated, and the Christian Bible was translated into Malay before it was into German by Martin Luther. Wasn't it? 1514 was the date you gave, and that was before.
But at least
German
probably not the whole
translation.
Bible, at least sections of it, like the Gospel of
And
Matthew.
of course, the German translation was the wonderful.
Ernest.
Well, for the Reformation,
Exactly. As
the
a
change
Lutheran,
of
yeah.
all of Europe.
That's right. That's right.
And so that was very curious. It's interesting. It was in the Malay first.
Yeah. And that's interesting also because the
But
sense.
that's not my question.
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, just a quick
Well,
comment.
I was
Sometimes.
just wondering, your,
Yeah, go ahead.
most of your slides had to do with what the Catholics said
Yeah.
in Malaysia. Where are the Lutherans on this? I know Lutheran is more congregationally oriented, so probably wouldn't have that.
Well, in the context of Malaysia, most of the voices are united with the Christian Federation of Malaysia. So I cited the Catholics partly because of the Herald is the one that the Catholic Church took them to court. But as far as all other statements that were made in public, it included the Protestants. And so the Protestants and the Catholics and the Evangelicals, they are part of the Christian Federation of Malaysia. And I didn't have time to cite all the statements, but that would have been included there.
Do the Lutherans leave it to the congregations?
Oh no, on this issue, I think the Protestants and Catholics and the Evangelicals were united as far as the leadership is concerned. And of course, there were some Christians that said, why do we even spend time doing this? Let's turn the other cheek and let's just change the word and just let it go, or use some other word. So there were some voices there. But as far as the leaders were concerned, and I think generally for most of the Malaysian Christians, and especially the indigenous Malay-speaking Christians, they were quite insistent that this must not be for them. Matthew.
Just a question of clarification on the scope of this ruling. So is it just in the Bibles that this word is now banned? Is it also in liturgical documents? I mean, I'm thinking of hymns, prayer services. How far does this extend? And what are people putting in its place if they can't use this word?
Okay, this is where things get a bit complicated. All right. As far as this judgment is concerned, it is only the Catholic Herald. So it didn't say about the Alkitab. So that's why in the pastoral letter there was more, besides that more preachy part. The Archbishop mentioned clearly that we will still continue using the word in the Alkitab, in the liturgy, in our religious practices. And that's the same for the Protestants. And frankly, we still use it today. In fact, you can. So in some sense, this became such a symbolic struggle, in a sense, right? But at the same time, some of our lawyers are concerned because they would feel that the implications of the judgment as a precedent would lead to other documents or other liturgical Christian educational materials being restricted or banned as well. Let's put it this way, restricted is already a given, right? So the question is banned. But in the mind of the public, in the discussions on the internet that I've seen or the comments I've looked at, of course most people wouldn't see the nuance that I'm talking about. They would just think in their mind. For some Muslims, if I interview them on the street, they might say, oh, the Christians cannot use the word Allah. Right? So that's maybe what some would think. Others who read more will probably know, if they read the judgment, they would know that it could be more restricted. So that's probably ongoing interreligious engagement that needs to be done and may still be an opportunity for us.
I wonder about the reactions from the official religious authorities, because in Malaysia we have a different state with different
Yes.
administration. Because I found, for example, a fatwa issued by the state of Perlis. This is in 2008, I believe, under the administration of Mufti of Dr. Asri,
Yes.
who is more reformist out in
Yeah.
that sense. So he said there is no prohibition for non-Muslim to use the word Allah. And so what are the rest of the state religious state say about this issue?
It's nice of Dr. Asri to say that. In fact, yeah, he was also a very important figure that I didn't mention during this controversy. Before he was Mufti, and then he wasn't, then he went back to be a Mufti.
Right.
And he was an important voice that provided a certain balance in the public discussion. So Perlis, interestingly, as you say, has this, but in Selangor it is still restricted. No to the use of not just Allah, but also Salat and Nabi. I think there are a few other words that are not allowed for Christians. But of course, this is where things are a bit complicated, right? Because the state enactments are only meant for Muslims. But these are non-Muslims. So in some sense, we are not subject to these laws, right? So what does this mean? So there's a certain ambiguity in that causes some frustration and tension in how to relate to one another. Unfortunately, that is the case. So you're right. There are these different voices that also non-Muslims recognize, and in the case of Paul Tan, he appreciated, especially when emotions were running high. I'll take that first. Okay.
Thanks. I'm more curious about the ruling itself. Obviously, it was seen before a civil court, but then there must have been some religious argumentation or citations from religious scholars
Yes.
that goes into the ruling. What was the argument there? From their end, I mean, you've mentioned Anwar Ibrahim and Hussein as against the ban from within Malaysia, and now we hear about the Mufti. Where did the government go with the others?
Well, this is where, this is going to be a bit too detailed, but interestingly, there were procedural things that the judges talked about, but there were also some parts where actually one of the judges, he did what we call internet research. He actually cited, interestingly, some sites that were Islamophobic websites to back his argument, which we were like, what was this all about? From Daniel Pipes or that kind of thing. And so there were some reactions from our side to say that, no, how could he actually back his arguments from these sites? But basically he was trying to say that even Christians do not have a consensus over this matter. Well, Christians really don't have a consensus on many issues, for a fact. But so that was some of it. But I know for sure there are some religious authorities in some educational materials. They do talk about another fatwa, actually, I think it's 1980s maybe, or maybe later, that talks about the purity of the kalima Allah, the purity of the name of Allah, that's meant only for Muslims. So there is also some discussions within some of the religious authorities, depending on the state as well. So I think some of that could have been implicit, but it was not explicitly mentioned in the civil court judgment. Yeah.
I was wondering if I could ask you a question on a related issue of hudud, Islamic punishments.
Okay.
Because, I've seen that religious leaders and even some politicians in Sabah and Sarawak have been very public in their discontent if hudud moves forward in the parliament as expected next month.
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering, if their vision is that this violates the 10-point agreement, what happens next if the parliament does approve it? What would you anticipate the reaction from Sabah and Sarawak?
Wow, this is such a $1 million question. I'm not too sure I'm the most competent person to answer you because I'm not in the parliament, right? But this discussion actually is probably the hottest topic right now, beyond the Allah controversy, because now you're talking about criminal punishments, you're talking about enlarging the Sharia court jurisdiction, the kind of punishments that's already existing. There's already a kind of, this is really probably too much to talk about. But the only thing I can say is that the Islamic Party president who initiated the private members bill, of course, received a lot of pressure on this by the opposition and, of course, the Sabah and Sarawak MPs. Now the bill is supposed to be debated from, initiated by the ruling government. So that's a bit different. Because for some Muslims, they feel that it shouldn't be the private members bill, but it should be initiated by the government that is perceived to be the voice of Islam, Malaysian Islam. So they may be more open, at least, to debate about this in Parliament. So this is still an open-ended issue because the Sarawak MPs and Sabah Sarawak, depending where they're from, and the opposition, they, for different reasons, are resisting this current move. And I can only speak more from the church perspective. I think the non-Muslims are very concerned over this, but also some of the Muslim NGOs and voices as well. Not only because some of them may be principally against it, because they feel that this may change the fabric of the Malaysian Federal Constitution. So that's a more larger picture they're looking at. But others are also very concerned about the whole procedural matters as well. How this, and what are the political dynamics that surrounds all these kind of pushing of bills, and who is more Islamic than the other. And this is constantly the dynamics in Malaysia that we are caught in. And non-Muslims are obviously affected by these matters. So this is challenging. And in fact, I'm getting 1G, the person I mentioned, to come to talk to my seminary, to a bunch of theological students about precisely this topic. And I wanted to get him to share his perspective for us, unfiltered. He's probably more critical about this right now.
You mentioned kind of indigenous Malay-speaking Christians in Sarawak. The Christians in Kuala Lumpur, what do they speak? I mean, they also speak Malay, or they?
Well, it depends, right? If for me, I will speak English. I speak Chinese.
So for example, your church services. Well, let's say a Lutheran church in Kuala Lumpur.
Yeah.
You would have the Bibles would be in English, or what would it?
But if I sing a Malay song, a song in Malay, that might have the word Allah in it, I'll sing it. Or if someone wants to read a particular passage, some of our services are multilingual. All right. If they are specifically from Sabah and Sarawak, then the likelihood is they will use Malay throughout as a first language. It is a heart language for them in that sense.
Was there ever any possibility of just limiting these restrictions to Sabah and Sarawak?
There was a discussion about that, whether it is just allowed in Sabah and Sarawak but not in West Malaysia.
Yeah.
But of course, this was then highly contested and debated because the joke was that if you flew on a plane from Sarawak to West Malaysia, you have to leave behind the use of the word Allah. If you landed in West Malaysia, this is like one country, you shouldn't have two policies. So there was some discussion, but this didn't really turn out. And also, people who moved from Sabah and Sarawak, they would naturally still use this Bible. And let's not forget, there are also indigenous, the population, the Orang Asli, the indigenous population in West Malaysia that also uses this. So, from the perspective of the Christians, this was a no-go as well.
Is Malaysia the only country with this population?
Brunei was next. They kind of followed us, interestingly. So, once upon a time, I could have said it was just us, but now I think Brunei.
Because Indonesia doesn't.
Yes, correct. Indonesia, and of course, there are many Christians who are using Arabic as their first language. This is the non-issue.
And southern Thailand.
Yeah, right. So in that sense, it is interesting how this is played out in Malaysia. Anything else? for those who are persevering to the end. Yes.
So based on that, where do these like ethnic dimensions get involved, and why is this, a Malaysian issue more than say an Arab issue or anything else? Is it because that is central to Sabah Sarawak and people don't feel comfortable about it, or is there something else? I mean, I don't want to say it's just politics.
Yeah, it is not just politics,
Yeah,
that's right.
so-
It's more than politics. I think that's what I'm trying to probably point towards more. It's, I think, for this issue has forced Malaysians to also, from a Christian perspective, to ask, is there kind of a Malaysian Christianity that has really settled in Malaysia, where the Malay language is our first religious language in the context of the indigenous people. And Malaysian Christianity can no longer be seen as a Western import. And now it's already rooted in the life of the indigenous Christians. So that's one way of looking at it, and that opens up some interesting discussions when it comes to interreligious dialogue. Because on the other side, it's interesting to look at my Muslim friends, where they're trying to figure out what does Malaysian Islam look like or should look like. So Professor Osman Bakar was very interesting, because I think, and he's been here before, he said that there's a danger of Malaysian Islam to be parochialized in Malaysia, whereas Islam should be universal in its intent and in its practice, right? So if you are kind of restricting or making this just a Malaysian issue or Malay issue, then I think his warning is interesting, and I found that to be quite informative and insightful, because this is also about Malay-Muslims asking the question, what does it mean to be a Malaysian as well, in the context of the non-Muslims also figuring out what does this mean? How are we glued together if we are not a melting pot losing our identities, but rather more like our Malaysian salad, rojak, which is where you kind of know who you are, you're trying to wrestle with modernity in your particular religious identities, and yet each community is trying to figure this out differently within this context where a lot of political dynamics are thrown in, and we haven't talked about economic dimensions, because Christians in Sabah would be poor, very poor. There are also elements that we is beyond the scope of this discussion. But that is what I find interesting for me, in particular for this, and I think that's a direction that would be worth going.
Thank you very much. Reverend Dr.